The white roses were dying. Cordelia Ashford noticed this small, terrible detail as the minutes stretched into something unbearable. The bouquet trembled in her hands, each petal curling inward like something trying to protect itself from harm. An hour ago, they had been perfect, dewy, fragrant, full of promise. Now they were wilting, and she knew exactly how they felt. The Church of
Unhand
St.
me!
Benedict
You will
held
not
300
take it!
souls.
Give it to me.
300 witnesses packed
it's
into
mine!
polished pews, their silk gowns rustling, their whispers rising like smoke toward the vaulted ceiling. 300 people who had come to see a wedding.
What is this
300
place?
pairs of eyes watching
think I see
Cordelia
something.
stand alone at the altar, waiting for a groom who showed no signs of coming. The clock in the tower struck the hour. Once, twice, 3 times, 45 minutes late. Her mother had stopped whispering reassurances 20 minutes ago. Her father had stopped checking his pocket watch 15 minutes ago. Now silence pressed down on the church like a physical weight broken only by the relentless tick of time passing and the soft sound of someone crying in the back pews. Cordelia's wedding gown felt like a shroud. Ivory silk and Belgian lace that had cost more than her family could afford, squeezing her ribs until each breath required conscious effort. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't faint, don't cry, don't let them see you break. But she could hear them. Oh, she could hear every word, nearly an hour now, unprecedented. I heard Lord Julian was seen leaving London last evening. Traveling north, someone said. But the wedding is here. Why would he go north precisely? The word landed between Cordelia's shoulder blades like a blade cold and sharp. She kept her spine straight, her chin lifted, her gaze fixed on the stained glass window above the altar, where painted saints looked down with expressions that might have been pity. She would not turn around, would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her face crumble. But she felt every stare, every pitying glance, every delighted smirk from those who had never quite believed that plain Cordelia Ashford deserved to marry a viscount. They had been right, apparently. The church doors groaned open. Cordelia's heart lurched with desperate, foolish hope. She turned, scattering rose petals across the altar steps, expecting to see Julian rushing in with apologies and explanations tumbling from his lips. Instead, she saw his brother. Nathaniel Thornhill stood in the doorway like a pillar of carved obsidian, dressed in unrelieved black as though he had come to a funeral rather than a wedding. His dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. Gray eyes, storm cloud eyes, eyes that assessed and calculated and revealed nothing. Those eyes found Cordelia across the length of the church, and something shifted in her chest. Something that felt like falling. She had met the Duke of Ravenwood exactly 3 times during her courtship with Julian. 3 stiff, formal encounters that had left her feeling like a butterfly pinned beneath glass. He never smiled, rarely spoke beyond what courtesy demanded. Julian had laughed about it once, calling his elder brother the family gargoyle, with the careless cruelty of a man who had never known true hardship. Now the gargoyle was walking down the aisle toward her. His boots echoed against the stone floor, each step deliberate, measured. The crowd fell silent, as though the very air had been sucked from the church. Cordelia's hands tightened on the wilting rose's thorns, pressing into her palms through the silk of her gloves. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell cedar and smoke something dark and expensive that made her think of winter nights and secrets kept in shadows. His face revealed nothing. Miss Ashford? His voice was low, precise. Each syllable measured like coins being counted. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare up at this man who looked at her as though she were a problem to be solved, rather than a bride to be pitied. I bear a message from my brother. No, please no. He will not be coming. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Somewhere behind her, a woman gasped. A man coughed. Then the whispers erupted into a roar that filled Cordelia's ears until she could hear nothing but the rushing of her own blood and the terrible, relentless pounding of her heart. Her knees buckled. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her before she could fall. The Duke's grip was firm, impersonal, but he did not release her even when she found her feet again. Breathe, he commanded, and somehow she obeyed. Where is he? The question scraped from her throat like broken glass. Where did Julian go? That is irrelevant now. Irrelevant, her voice cracked, but she didn't care anymore. Didn't care who heard. I'm standing at an altar in front of 300 people wearing a wedding gown for a wedding that is not happening, and you tell me it is irrelevant. Something shifted in those gray eyes, not warmth exactly, something harder to name, something that looked almost like anger, but not directed at her. What I tell you, Miss Ashford, is that my brother is a coward and a fool. He has placed you in an impossible situation. The Duke's gaze swept across the watching crowd and his expression darkened. These people will feast on your humiliation for years. Your family's reputation will not survive the scandal. Your prospects will be destroyed. Each word was a hammer blow, driving truth deeper into her chest. He was right. She knew he was right. By tomorrow morning, Cordelia Ashford would be the cautionary tale mothers whispered to their daughters. The foolish girl who believed a viscount could actually love her. Unless, her breath caught, unless his hands were still on her elbows. His eyes, gray as winter storms, held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken in a way she did not understand. Unless you marry me instead. The world stopped making sense. Cordelia stared at the Duke of Ravenwood, certain she had misheard. Behind her, gasps transformed into shocked exclamations, but the sound seemed to come from very far away, as though she were underwater and drowning slowly. I beg your pardon. You heard me clearly, Miss Ashford. His voice remained steady, utterly calm, as though proposing marriage to humiliated women was something he did every day. Marry me now in front of these witnesses, transform scandal into spectacle, abandonment into opportunity. You cannot be serious. I am always serious. His grip on her elbows tightened fractionally, and she became acutely aware of how close they stood, how the heat of his hand burned through the delicate fabric of her sleeves. Marry me today, and by tomorrow you will not be the jilted bride. You will be the Duchess of Ravenwood, and no one will dare pity you again. She searched his face for any sign of mockery, any hint that this was some cruel jest designed to compound her humiliation. She found nothing but cold, implacable resolve. Why? The question burst from her. Why would you do this? My reasons are my own. That is not good enough. You cannot expect me to marry a stranger without explanation. I can expect whatever I choose. Something flickered in his eyes. I'm offering you salvation, Miss Ashford. The alternative is to walk out of this church alone, past 300 witnesses who will ensure your ruin spreads across England before nightfall. Her chest constricted. She thought of her mother who had wept with joy when Julian proposed. Her father who had borrowed heavily to fund this wedding, this dress, this desperate grasp at respectability. She thought of the letters that would arrive tomorrow, the invitations that would be rescinded, the doors that would close forever. My family, she whispered, the debts, will be addressed. He said it as though resolving financial ruin was as simple as ordering tea. Your father's obligations will become mine. Your mother and your sister will be provided for. You will want for nothing. It was too much, too sudden, too impossible to process. Cordelia felt as though she had stepped into someone else's life, someone else's nightmare, someone else's incomprehensible rescue. I do not understand, she said. You barely know me. We have spoken perhaps a dozen words to each other in the entirety of our acquaintance. I know enough. What does that mean? For the first time, a different expression crossed his features. Not warmth, not softness, but something like reluctant acknowledgement. It means, Miss Ashford, that I have observed you for the past 6 months while you endured my brother's courtship. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. I have watched you navigate his carelessness with grace, tolerate his dismissiveness with dignity, smile through his casual cruelties as though they did not wound you. He paused, and in that pause something dangerous bloomed in Cordelia's chest. I know you deserve better than what he offered, the Duke said quietly. I know you are stronger than anyone in this church realizes. And I know that if you walk away from this altar alone, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever seen her like this. The words laid bare truths she had hidden even from herself. And standing in the wreckage of her dreams, Cordelia found that the Duke's cold precision felt oddly like kindness. If I say yes, she said slowly, what happens then? Then we proceed. He glanced toward the vicar who stood frozen at the altar with his prayer book clutched to his chest like a shield. The ceremony continues, the guests witness a wedding. The scandal becomes a sensation, yes, but a favorable one. You become the Duchess of Ravenwood, and no one will dare pity you again. The Duchess of Ravenwood. The title felt foreign, impossible, like trying to wear a crown made for another woman's head. And afterward, her voice was barely a whisper now. What happens afterward? Afterward, you will come to Ravenwood Hall as my wife. You will have your own chambers, your own staff, your own allowance. Something passed through his gaze too quick to identify. I will make no demands of you that you do not wish to fulfill. I can be a cold husband, Miss Ashford. I will not pretend otherwise. But I will never abandon you at an altar. I will never make you a fool in front of witnesses. That much I can promise. It was not a declaration of love. It was not even a declaration of affection. But standing in the ruins of her future wearing a gown meant for another man's promises, Cordelia found that it was enough. She looked past him at the assembled crowd, saw her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's ash-gray pallor, the vultures circling eager for blood. She thought of Julian, who had promised her forever, and then fled, without even the courage to tell her himself. She thought of all the years ahead marked by whispers and pity and closed doors. And then she thought of the man standing before her cold as marble, but offering her a lifeline nonetheless. Yes, she heard herself say, I will marry you. The Duke released her elbows at last. The absence of his touch left her strangely unsteady, as though she had been leaning against him without realizing it. Vicar, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence of the church. We will proceed. The ceremony that followed would live in Cordelia's memory as something fractured and strange, a fever dream painted in shadows and candlelight. Father Whitmore, a nervous man who had been expecting to marry her to Julian, fumbled through his prayer book with trembling hands. The liturgy had to be adjusted, names changed, the special license that had been prepared for one brother hastily amended to accommodate the other. Through it all, the Duke of Ravenwood stood beside her like a statue, his presence both anchor and enigma. Cordelia heard her own voice as though from a great distance, reciting vows that felt too large for her mouth, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. Words that should have bound her to Julian now bound her to this stranger instead. This cold, powerful man who had swept in like a storm and upended everything. His hand was steady when he took hers to slide on the ring, a band of white gold set with a single sapphire. It belonged to my mother, he murmured, and though the ring was slightly loose on her finger, it felt strangely right. His skin was warm against her cold fingers. She found herself wondering absurdly if dukes ran hotter than ordinary men. With this ring, I thee wed. His voice never wavered, never softened, but there was weight to the words that made something twist beneath Cordelia's ribs. Father Whitmore pronounced them man and wife, his voice shaking only slightly. The Duke leaned down to press a kiss to her cheek. Brief, formal, his lips barely grazed her skin before he withdrew, but Cordelia felt the ghost of that touch long after he stepped back. It was done. Cordelia Ashford was now Cordelia Thornhill, Duchess of Ravenwood, and she had no idea what that meant. The wedding breakfast passed in a blur of faces and forced smiles. The food had been prepared for a different groom, the seating arrangements made for a different couple, but somehow everything proceeded as though this had been the plan all along. Cordelia smiled until her face ached, accepted congratulations that ranged from genuine to incredulous to barely concealed envy. Tried not to notice the way people looked at her husband, because they did look. Everyone looked at the Duke of Ravenwood with the wary fascination reserved for apex predators. He moved through the crowd like a shark through still water, exchanging the minimum required pleasantries, deflecting questions about Julian with icy finality, never once straying far from Cordelia's side. People are staring, she murmured, during a rare moment when no one was demanding their attention. Let them. His hand rested at the small of her back, the touch light but somehow possessive. By tomorrow they will have constructed a dozen romantic narratives to explain today's events. Let them believe whatever fiction brings them comfort. And what is the truth? He looked down at her, his gray eyes unreadable. The truth is rarely as interesting as the story. Before she could respond, her mother appeared, fresh tears streaming down her face. My darling girl. She gathered Cordelia into an embrace that smelled of rosewater and relief. I do not understand what has happened, but you are safe now. You are protected. She pulled back, clasping Cordelia's hands in hers. A duchess. My daughter, a duchess. Cordelia tried to summon a reassuring smile, but her face felt frozen. Your Grace. Her mother turned to Nathaniel, dropping into a curtsy so deep it was nearly genuflection. I cannot begin to express our gratitude. When he, Madam, the Duke's voice was not unkind, but it brooked no further discussion. Your daughter has had an exhausting day. I am sure you understand that we must depart for Ravenwood Hall this evening. Of course, of course. Her mother squeezed Cordelia's hands one final time, her eyes bright with tears and something that looked almost like awe. Write to me, darling. Tell me everything. Cordelia promised she would, though she had no idea what she would say. The carriage that waited outside the church was black and gleaming, pulled by four matched gray horses that looked as cold and elegant as their master. A footman in Ravenwood livery helped Cordelia inside, and she sank onto velvet cushions that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. The Duke settled across from her, his long legs stretched out, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside as the carriage lurched into motion. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and strange. Cordelia studied her new husband in the fading afternoon light. He was handsome, she supposed, in the way that mountains were handsome. Impressive. Forbidding. Not something you wanted to get too close to. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his cheekbones severe, his mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a foreign concept. "You are staring, though," he said without looking at her. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I apologize. I was simply wondering what manner of man I have married." A fair question given the circumstances. "You must admit the circumstances are rather unusual. They are unprecedented." He inclined his head slightly. "And yet, here we are." "Here we are," Cordelia echoed. She twisted the unfamiliar ring on her finger, watching the sapphire catch the light. "May I ask you something?" "You may ask. Whether I answer remains to be seen." "Where is Julian? Where did he go?" The Duke's expression hardened. "My brother has fled to the continent. Paris, I am told, though by now he may have moved on. He left a letter explaining that he found himself unable to proceed with the marriage." "Unable," Cordelia repeated the word. "What does that mean?" "It means he is a coward who could not face the consequences of his own choices." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It means he decided that his freedom was worth more than your future, your family's security, or basic human decency." The words should have hurt more than they did. Perhaps the wound was too fresh, too deep for proper pain. Or perhaps some part of Cordelia had always known that Julian's charm was merely surface, his promises as substantial as morning mist. "Did you know," she asked, "did you know he was going to run?" The silence that followed was heavy-weighted with something she could not name. "I suspected," the Duke said finally. "My brother has always been skilled at evading responsibility. When he failed to arrive at the church by the appointed hour, I knew. And you decided to intervene. I decided to offer you an alternative." Why? The question hung in the air between them. The same question she had asked at the altar. The question he still had not truly answered. The Duke turned back to the window, his profile sharp against the gray sky. "Because you deserved better than what he gave you. Because someone needed to act, and no one else would." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Because I could." It was not an answer, not really. But something in his voice, some thread of emotion carefully suppressed, told Cordelia that there was more to this story than the Duke was willing to reveal. The carriage crested a hill and her breath caught. Ravenwood Hall rose from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel. Gray stone towers pierced the darkening sky. Hundreds of windows glittered with candlelight. Vast grounds spread in every direction like a kingdom unto itself. It was beautiful and terrible and overwhelming in equal measure. "Welcome home," the Duke said, and Cordelia heard something in his voice she could not quite identify. The carriage wheels crunched on gravel as they approached the main entrance, where a small army of servants had assembled to greet their new duchess. Cordelia looked at the impossible house, the silent husband, the life that had been thrust upon her without warning or preparation. What had she agreed to? And more importantly, why did the Duke of Ravenwood's gray eyes hold shadows that seemed far deeper than mere coldness? Ravenwood Hall swallowed Cordelia whole. She had thought herself prepared for grandeur. The Ashford family was not wealthy, but they were gentry, and Cordelia had attended enough society events to know what fine houses looked like. She had visited Julian's London townhouse during their courtship, admired its elegant furnishings, its tasteful artwork, its air of casual prosperity. None of it had prepared her for this. The entrance hall alone could have contained her family's entire home. Marble floors stretched in every direction, veined with gray and silver, that caught the candlelight from chandeliers dripping crystal, like frozen waterfalls. Portraits of stern-faced Thornhill ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her as servants materialized from shadowed doorways. A woman stepped forward, tall, spare, her gray hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her black dress marked her as the housekeeper, and her eyes assessed Cordelia with the clinical precision of a jeweler examining a stone of questionable value. "Your Grace," she curtsied, "I am Mrs. Fletcher. Welcome to Ravenwood Hall." "Thank you." Cordelia's voice sounded thin and adequate against the vastness of the space. Mrs. Fletcher manages the household, Nathaniel said, his hands settling at her lower back. The touch steadied her, though she could not have said why. She will see to anything you require. The Duchess's chambers have been prepared. Mrs. Fletcher continued, her tone professionally neutral. Per His Grace's instructions. Cordelia caught something in those words, some emphasis she could not quite parse. Per His Grace's instructions. What instructions? When had there been time for instructions? But the Duke was already guiding her toward the grand staircase, and she had no opportunity to ask. Her chambers were not chambers. They were a suite, a self-contained world of silk and velvet and polished wood, a sitting room with windows overlooking gardens that disappeared into darkness, a dressing room larger than her bedroom at home, and the bedroom itself dominated by a four-poster bed draped in fabric the color of midnight sky, its posts carved with climbing roses and thorns. These were my mother's rooms, Nathaniel said, and something in his voice made Cordelia turn to look at him. Were. She died when I was 12. They have been closed ever since. He moved to the fireplace where flames already crackled against the evening chill. I had them reopened for you. The weight of that statement settled over Cordelia like a cloak. 20 years these rooms had been shuttered, preserved in memory's amber, and he had opened them for her. A woman he barely knew, a wife he had claimed out of obligation or pity or some motivation she still could not name. That is, she struggled for words. That is very generous. Generosity has nothing to do with it. His voice had returned to its usual coldness. You are the Duchess of Ravenwood now. You should have rooms befitting the title. Before she could respond, a knock at the door announced a young woman with copper hair and bright eyes that sparkled with poorly concealed curiosity. Your Grace, she curtsied deeply. I am Beatrice. I have been assigned as your lady's maid. Assigned by whom? By His Grace, ma'am, this morning. This morning, hours before the wedding, hours before Julian had fled, and Nathaniel had stepped in to save her, and yet somehow preparations had already been made. Cordelia looked at her husband, questions burning on her tongue, but he was already moving toward the door. I will leave you to rest, he said. Dinner will be served at 8. Beatrice will show you to the dining room when you are ready. Wait, but he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt far too final. Cordelia sank onto the edge of the enormous bed, her wedding gown pulling around her like a silk ghost. The room was beautiful, undeniably beautiful, but it felt like standing inside a painting. Lovely to look at, impossible to touch without leaving smudges. Your Grace. Beatrice's voice was gentle. Shall I help you change? There is a nightdress laid out, and I can draw a bath if you would like. A bath? When had she last had a proper bath? Hot water and scented oils, and time to simply exist. Yes, Cordelia heard herself say, a bath would be lovely. As Beatrice bustled about disappearing through a door Cordelia had not noticed into what proved to be a private bathing chamber with actual plumbing, Cordelia wandered the sitting room. Her fingers trailed over furniture that probably cost more than her father's debts, over books that looked too beautiful to read, over a writing desk stocked with paper and ink and sealing wax in the Ravenwood colors. And then she noticed the dress. It hung in the dressing room, clearly visible through the open door. Not her wedding gown, which lay wilted where she had dropped it. This was something else entirely. A gown of deep emerald velvet trimmed with silver embroidery that caught the light like trapped stars. Beside it, slippers to match. A shawl of cashmere so soft it felt like touching clouds. Beatrice, her voice came out strange. Where did this come from? The maid appeared in the doorway, the towel over her arm. His Grace had it commissioned, Massimo, last week for tonight. Last week, before the wedding, before any of this had happened. I do not understand, Cordelia whispered. But even as she said it, a strange suspicion began to form in her mind. How much had the Duke of Ravenwood known? How much had he planned? And what exactly had she married into? The week that followed was like living in a dream, where everything was beautiful and nothing made sense. Cordelia woke each morning to find chocolate and fresh pastries on a tray beside her bed. She explored Ravenwood Hall when she could, losing herself in galleries and libraries and conservatories filled with exotic plants that seemed impossibly alive against the gray English sky. And things appeared, small things at first, easily overlooked if she had not been paying attention. A book of poetry on her sitting room table Tuesday morning. Keats, not Byron. Her favorite. The spine cracked in just the way she liked, with a ribbon marking a particular verse about resilience and hope. Fresh roses on her breakfast tray. Wednesday, not the wilted white blooms from the church, but vibrant pink roses, dewy and fragrant, though the gardens were barren with frost. A cashmere shawl Thursday afternoon draped over her favorite chair in the library, the precise shade of blue she had admired in a fashion plate weeks ago, but never mentioned aloud. "Where do these come from?" she asked Beatrice, Friday morning, gesturing to a new writing habit that had appeared in her dressing room overnight. Deep burgundy wool cut to her exact measurements, with jet buttons that gleamed like captured shadows. "I could not say, Your Grace." But Beatrice's eyes sparkled with knowing. Cordelia began to watch more carefully. She noticed that the library always had a fire burning when she arrived, though she kept no regular schedule. That her favorite biscuits appeared on her afternoon tea tray without her ever mentioning her preference. That every room she frequented was somehow warmer, brighter, more comfortable than it had any right to be. And she began to understand. The Duke of Ravenwood was not demonstrative. He did not speak of feelings or offer compliments or engage in the small intimacies that most marriages contain. But he watched, he noticed, and in his silent, systematic way, he provided. It was a form of courtship, she realized, strange and indirect and utterly unlike anything she had experienced. But courtship nonetheless. The realization made something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous. On Saturday evening, Cordelia was summoned to meet the Dowager Duchess. "Her Grace does not live in the main house," Beatrice explained as she helped Cordelia dress. "She has her own wing on the east side, but she wishes to meet you." Something in the maid's careful tone suggested this was not optional. The Dowager's rooms were a study in controlled elegance, pale blue walls, silver fixtures, furniture that managed to be both delicate and somehow threatening. And at the center, seated in a chair that might as well have been a throne, sat Genevieve Thornhill. She was ancient, perhaps 80, but age had only refined her rather than diminishing her. White hair swept up in an elaborate style, bones sharp beneath papery skin, eyes the same gray as her grandson's but somehow colder. She wore black silk and pearls, and she examined Cordelia with the detached interest of a scientist studying an unusual specimen. "So," her voice was surprisingly strong, "you are the young woman who was abandoned at the altar and somehow emerged as Duchess of Ravenwood." No greeting, no pleasantries. Cordelia's spine straightened. "I am." "Sit." Cordelia sat in an indicated chair, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "Tell me about yourself," the Dowager commanded. "Not the polished version you would offer at a dinner party. The truth." It was the last thing Cordelia had expected. She drew a careful breath. "My father is a gentleman of modest means who made unfortunate investments. My mother is the daughter of a country vicar. We have no great connections, no impressive fortune, no particular claim to significance." She met the Dowager's eyes directly. "I was engaged to your younger grandson because he found me tolerable, and my family was too desperate to question his motives. I stood at that altar, believing I was about to secure my family's future. Instead, I was publicly humiliated. And then your other grandson appeared." "Yes. Why did you accept him?" The question cut to the heart of everything Cordelia had been wondering herself. She considered lying, offering some pretty fiction about gratitude or admiration. But the Dowager's eyes were too sharp, too knowing. "Because I had no other choice," Cordelia said. "Because my family would have been ruined by the scandal." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because he looked at me as though I was worth saving." A flash of recognition crossed the Dowager's ancient eyes. Did he know? Her voice was softer now. Did Nathaniel know Julian would flee? "I do not pretend to understand his motives," Cordelia said honestly. "I do not know why he did what he did. But I know that without his intervention, I would have walked out of that church into a life of whispers and closed doors. Whatever his reasons, I am grateful." The Dowager was silent for a long moment, her gaze boring into Cordelia with unnerving intensity. "My grandson," she said finally, "has been frozen since his mother died. Longer, perhaps. His father was never warm to begin with. Nathaniel has spent 20 years building walls so high that no one can scale them. Not me, not his brother, not any of the suitable young ladies I have paraded before him for the past decade." Cordelia was not sure how to respond to this. "And then yesterday," the Dowager continued, "he did something utterly unprecedented. He intervened. He acted. He claimed a bride in the most dramatic fashion imaginable." She leaned forward. "Do you know what I think, Duchess?" "No, Your Grace." "I think my grandson saw something in you, something that cracked through that ice of his for the first time in 2 decades. I do not know what it was. Perhaps you do not either yet, but I intend to watch what happens next with great interest. The words should have felt like a threat. Instead, they felt like something else entirely. Like a puzzle piece Cordelia had not known she was missing. I have no intention of hurting him, she said quietly. If that is your concern, hurt him. The dowager laughed a dry, rasping sound. My dear girl, I am not worried about you hurting Nathaniel. I am worried about what will happen when he finally allows himself to feel something and discovers he does not know how to handle it. She rose, signaling the interview's end. Welcome to the family Duchess. Try not to burn it down. That evening, Cordelia found Nathaniel in the library. He sat in a leather chair by the fire, a ledger open on his lap, his dark head bent over columns of figures. He had not heard her approach, and for a moment she simply stood in the doorway watching him. In unguarded moments like this, the ice melted slightly from his features. She could see the exhaustion in the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the pen too tightly. He carried something heavy, she thought, something that bent him even as he refused to break. Are you going to stand there all evening? He had not looked up, but somehow he had known. I was trying not to disturb you. Too late, but he set aside the ledger, gesturing to the chair across from him. Join me. She settled into the offered seat, tucking her feet beneath her in a way that would have scandalized her mother. If Nathaniel noticed the informality, he did not comment. I wanted to thank you, she said, for the books, for the flowers, for making this, she gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the impossible situation, easier than it had any right to be. You found them. I would have to be blind not to notice. She leaned forward. How did you know about the Keats, about the roses, about all of it? The silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. My brother talked about you, Nathaniel said finally. During his courtship, not often and not kindly, but occasionally details emerged. Your preferences, your habits, your history. His jaw tightened. I paid attention. Why? He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something behind the ice. Something vast and complicated and carefully contained. Because he did not deserve you, Nathaniel said quietly. Because I watched him court you with carelessness and neglect, and I thought, he stopped seeming to catch himself. You thought what? Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. I thought that if I ever had the chance, I would do better. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Cordelia's heart was beating too fast, her breath coming too shallow. And now you have the chance, she said softly. Now I have the chance. He held her gaze, and for one impossible moment, the fortress around him seemed to dissolve. She saw loneliness so profound it ached to witness, grief that had calcified into something sharp and cold. And beneath it all, barely visible, the faintest flicker of hope. Then he looked away, and the barriers rebuilt themselves. It is late, he said. You should rest. Nathaniel. Good night, Cordelia. It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his voice, low and careful and weighted with something she could not name, made something crack open in her chest. Good night, she whispered. She left him there by the fire, surrounded by shadows and silence, and the ghosts of words unsaid. But as she climbed the stairs to her chambers, she realized something had shifted. The ice was beginning to fracture, and tomorrow she would return to the library. She would sit in that chair again. She would ask more questions, push a little harder against those walls, because the Duke of Ravenwood had saved her from one disaster. The least she could do was save him from the prison he had built for himself. In the darkness of her room, Cordelia touched the sapphire ring on her finger and allowed herself to smile. Let the games begin. The second week began with books. Cordelia woke Tuesday morning to find 3 volumes stacked on her sitting room table. First editions. Rare. The kind of books scholars whispered about in hushed tones and collectors paid fortunes to possess. She lifted the top volume with trembling hands. Prometheus Unbound by Shelley. She had mentioned it once weeks ago during one of Julian's interminable dinner parties, mentioned how she had always wanted to read it but could never find a copy. Julian had laughed, called her pretentious, changed the subject, but someone had been listening. Inside the cover, a note in precise, angular handwriting, for the library, or for you, whichever you prefer. No signature, none needed. Cordelia pressed the book to her chest and felt something dangerous bloom beneath her ribs. By Wednesday, the music room had been transformed. She discovered it by accident, following the sound of workmen's voices down a corridor she had not yet explored. The door stood open, revealing a room flooded with morning light. The pianoforte had been moved to face the windows. New cushions adorned the bench. Sheet music she recognized, her favorites pieces she had played as a girl arranged in careful stacks. Mrs. Fletcher appeared at her elbow. His Grace thought you might enjoy having a space to practice. He mentioned you played. I have not played in years, Cordelia said softly. Perhaps it is time to begin again. That afternoon, Cordelia sat at the pianoforte and let her fingers remember what her mind had tried to forget. The music came haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. She played until the light faded and candles were lit, played until her fingers ached and her heart felt strangely full. She did not see Nathaniel watching from the doorway, did not notice him standing there for nearly an hour listening, did not see the expression on his face, something caught between pain and wonder before he slipped away into shadow. But the next morning she found new sheet music on the bench. Modern compositions she had never seen. And another note, your playing is beautiful. Do not stop. Week 3 brought dinners. Not the formal affairs with footmen and multiple courses. Intimate suppers in a small dining room Cordelia had not known existed. Just the two of them at a table meant for four, with candles and wine and food chosen specifically for her tastes. How did you know I preferred salmon to beef? She asked the first evening. Nathaniel did not look up from his plate. I pay attention. That is becoming evident. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. They talked that night, really talked, about books and music and the strange isolation of growing up in houses too large for the people who lived in them. Nathaniel spoke haltingly at first, as though he had forgotten how to share pieces of himself, but slowly, carefully he opened. He told her about his mother, how she had loved the roses, how she had died when he was 12, and his father had sealed her rooms the very next day, as though erasing her from existence would ease the pain. He could not bear to look at anything that reminded him of her, Nathaniel said quietly, including me. I have her eyes, apparently. Cordelia's chest tightened. That must have been unbearable. It was efficient. His voice was carefully neutral. I learned early that sentiment was weakness. That emotion was something to be controlled, not indulged. And is that what you believe? He met her gaze then, and something flickered in those gray depths. I believed it for 20 years. Now I find myself uncertain. The word hung between them like a confession. By the 4th week, Cordelia had stopped questioning the tokens of affection. They arrived like clockwork. A new novel she had mentioned wanting to read. Hothouse flowers when the gardens were barren. A shawl and cashmere so soft it felt like sin. Chocolates from a confectioner in London who only made them to order. But it was the small gestures that undid her. The way her sitting room was always warm when she entered, fire already crackling. The way her tea arrived precisely as she liked it, strong with honey. No milk, though she had never told anyone her preference. The way books she finished reading would disappear from her nightstand and reappear in the library properly shelved, but with a bookmark indicating where she had stopped in case she wanted to revisit. Someone was watching, learning, caring, and that someone was a man who claimed he could not feel. Month 2 arrived with unexpected spring warmth and an invitation that made Cordelia's stomach clench. The Earl of Somerset requested the honor of their presence at a ball. 300 guests, the first major social event since their wedding. We do not have to attend, Nathaniel said when she showed him the invitation. They were in the library. Their library, she had started thinking of it. The place they met most evenings, now talking until the candles burn low. People will talk if we do not go. People will talk regardless. He set down his book. I do not care what they say, but I will not subject you to their scrutiny if you prefer to avoid it. Cordelia thought of the whispers, the pitying looks, the delighted gossip about the jilted bride and her rescue by the cold duke. I am tired of hiding, she said. Let them look, let them talk. I have nothing to be ashamed of. Something that might have been pride crossed his features. No, you do not. The portrait arrived the week before the ball. Cordelia found it hanging in the long gallery between Nathaniel's mother and grandmother. The artist had captured her in the rose garden, though she had no memory of sitting for such a painting. She wore the emerald gown from her first night at Ravenwood, and the light caught her face in a way that made her look almost beautiful. When did you commission this? She asked Nathaniel that evening. Does it matter? Yeah, bam. He was quiet for a long moment. The week after your engagement to Julian was announced. I told myself it was merely an exercise, preserving beauty for the family collection. But I knew even then that I was lying to myself. Cordelia's breath caught. You painted me into your family before I ever belonged here. You have always belonged here. His voice was rough, raw. I simply lacked the courage to do anything about it until circumstances forced my hand. She wanted to ask more, wanted to press against these cracks in his armor and see what lay beneath. But something in his expression stopped her. A vulnerability so profound it felt like trespassing to witness it. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. He stiffened. Then slowly his fingers closed around hers. They stood that way in the gallery, surrounded by generations of thornhills, and did not speak, did not need to. Some things existed beyond words. The night before the ball, Cordelia found a note on her pillow. You asked me once why I intervened, why I offered marriage when I could have simply let you walk away. The truth is complicated, and I am not skilled at speaking it aloud. But I want you to know that every choice I have made since that day has been about keeping you safe, keeping you here, keeping you mine in whatever way you will allow. Tomorrow they will stare and whisper and judge. Let them. You are the Duchess of Ravenwood, and you are worth 1,000 of them. Never doubt that. Never doubt yourself. And never doubt that I will stand beside you for as long as you permit it. No signature. But she knew his handwriting now, knew the careful formation of each letter, the slight slant to his script. She pressed the note to her heart and let herself imagine what it might mean. The Somerset ball blazed with 1,000 candles. Cordelia descended from the carriage on Nathaniel's arm, her gown of midnight blue silk catching the light. The sapphires at her throat, his mother's sapphires, felt heavy with history and expectation. Steady, Nathaniel murmured as they approached the entrance. You look magnificent. Remember that. Inside, the crowd parted like water. Every eye turned to watch them. The whispers started immediately slithering through the ballroom like serpents. The abandoned bride and her rescuer. Some say he planned it all along. Poor thing, she must be so grateful. Grateful. She trapped him clearly. Cordelia's spine straightened. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. None of them knew the truth. The Earl of Somerset greeted them with effusive warmth that felt calculated. His wife's eyes assessed Cordelia's gown, her jewels searching for flaws to report. They found none. Your Grace, Lady Somerset simpered. How delightful that you could attend. We were all so surprised by your nuptials. So sudden. Sometimes the best decisions are made quickly. Nathaniel said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. I would not change a single moment. Cordelia felt his hand tighten on hers, and something warm unfurled in her chest. They danced the first waltz. Nathaniel moved with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. But there was something different about the way he held her now. Closer than strictly proper. His hand warm and sure at her waist. You dance well, Cordelia said softly. I was taught by the best instructors. A pause. Though I have always hated it. Why dance with me then? His gray eyes met hers, and for once they were not cold. Because you love it. And I find I would endure far worse than a waltz to see you smile. Her breath caught. Nathaniel, do not. His voice was rough. Do not say anything. Just let me have this moment. Let me pretend for the length of one dance that this is real. It is real, she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Something dangerous and desperate, and entirely too vulnerable for a crowded ballroom. He pulled her closer, propriety be damned, and Cordelia let him. The music swelled around them. The crowd faded to nothing. There was only the rhythm of his heartbeat against her palm, the warmth of his breath stirring her hair, the impossible intimacy of two people learning to fit together. When the dance ended, Nathaniel did not release her immediately. His fingers lingered at her waist, his eyes searching her face as though memorizing every detail. Thank you, he said quietly, for being here, for standing beside me, for being brave when I know you must be terrified. I am not terrified anymore, Cordelia said, and realized with a jolt that it was true. They danced 3 more waltzes, an unprecedented number. The ton would talk about it for weeks. Cordelia did not care. Between dances, Nathaniel stayed close, deflecting intrusive questions with icy politeness, steering her away from the worst of the gossips. Several ladies attempted to engage him in conversation, their fans fluttering their eyes assessing. He dismissed them all with brutal efficiency. You are making enemies, Cordelia observed. I already had enemies. Now I simply no longer pretend otherwise. During the 4th dance, Lady Somerset approached with poorly concealed glee. Your Grace, you must come meet the Marchioness of Westfield. She is simply dying to make your acquaintance. It was a trap. Cordelia could see it in the woman's eyes. But before she could respond, Nathaniel stepped between them. My wife is engaged for this dance, he said, his voice quiet but absolutely final. And the next, and every dance after that. We will not be taking calls this evening. Lady Somerset's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Of course, Your Grace. Forgive the intrusion. She fled and Cordelia felt laughter bubble up in her throat. That was cruel. That was necessary. Nathaniel guided her back onto the floor. She wanted to parade you like a curiosity. I will not allow it. My protector, Cordelia said softly. Always. The words settled over her like a vow. The evening was nearly over when everything changed. Cordelia stood near the terrace doors, taking a moment to breathe when the crowd suddenly hushed. That particular silence that meant something scandalous had occurred. She turned to see what had caused the stir, and her heart stopped. Julian stood in the doorway. He looked thinner than she remembered, his golden hair disheveled, his evening clothes expensive, but somehow rumpled as though he had dressed in haste. And on his arm a woman Cordelia did not recognize. Beautiful, blonde, dripping with jewels that screamed old money. Oh dear, someone whispered nearby. Is that Lord Julian, back from the continent? And with Ophelia Carlyle no less, the Earl of Wexford's daughter. I heard her father gambled away their fortune. She is desperate for a match. Julian's eyes found Cordelia across the room. Something flickered in their depths. Regret, perhaps, or calculation. Then Nathaniel was there, materializing at her side like a shadow given form. Breathe, he commanded softly. Do not give him the satisfaction of seeing you affected. I am not affected, Cordelia said, and was surprised to find it true. Looking at Julian now, she felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just a distant curiosity about what she had ever seen in him. Julian crossed the ballroom toward them, Ophelia clinging to his arm like a beautiful barnacle. Brother, his voice carried across the sudden silence. How unexpected to see you here. And Cordelia, my dear, you look well. It is your grace, Nathaniel said coldly. You will address my wife with proper respect, or you will not address her at all. A flush crept up Julian's neck. Of course. Forgive me, your grace. He made the title sound like an insult. I simply wanted to offer my congratulations on your marriage. So sudden, so convenient. Convenient for whom? Cordelia asked, her voice steady. Why, for everyone, I should think. Julian's smile was sharp. I was unable to fulfill my obligations. My brother stepped in. You got a duke instead of a viscount. Everyone wins. Ophelia laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on Cordelia's nerves. How romantic, like something from a novel. Miss Carlyle, Nathaniel said, his tone glacial. I do not believe we have been introduced, though I am well acquainted with your father's debts. The woman's smile faltered. Nathaniel, Julian said, and now his voice held an edge. Always so direct, so cold. Tell me, does your wife know the truth about your gallant rescue? Does she know about father's will? The ballroom, already silent, somehow became quieter. Cordelia's stomach dropped. What will— Oh, you did not tell her. Julian's eyes gleamed with malicious delight. How careless of you, brother. Or perhaps not careless at all. Perhaps strategic. Julian, Nathaniel's voice was a warning. Do not do this. Why not? She deserves to know the truth. Julian turned to Cordelia and she saw something desperate in his expression. Something that might have been jealousy or pain, or both. My father's will stipulated that Nathaniel must marry before his 35th birthday or forfeit half the estate to me. He had 3 months left when you stood at that altar. 3 months to find a suitable bride. The words hit like physical blows. Cordelia felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. So you see, Julian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, your husband did not marry you out of nobility or kindness. He married you because it was expedient, because you were there abandoned and desperate, and he needed a wife. Any wife would have done. You simply had the courtesy to be convenient. The whispers erupted, a tidal wave of shocked exclamations and delighted gossip. Cordelia looked at Nathaniel. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Is it true? Her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it. Cordelia, is it true? A pause that lasted forever. Yes. The world fractured. She turned and walked away, through the crowd that parted before her, past the shocked faces and hungry stares, out the terrace doors into the cold night air. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel's voice, low and furious. You will regret this, brother. I promise you that. But she did not stay to hear Julian's response. She kept walking. The carriage ride back to Ravenwood Hall was silent. Nathaniel sat across from her, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of controlled fury. Cordelia stared out the window at the passing darkness and felt nothing. Numbness was a mercy. Feeling would come later, and it would destroy her. When they arrived, she went straight to her chambers without a word. Beatrice was waiting, her face concerned, but Cordelia waved her away. "Leave me, please. Your Grace, if you need, I need to be alone." The door closed, silence pressed down, and finally, blessedly, Cordelia let herself feel. The tears came first, hot and furious and tinged with humiliation. She had been such a fool, such a naive, desperate fool. Of course there had been another reason. Of course his dramatic rescue had served his own purposes. Men like Nathaniel did not act out of pure altruism. They calculated. They planned. They used whatever tools were available to achieve their goals. And she had been a very useful tool indeed. The gifts, the attention, the careful courtship, all of it had been manipulation designed to keep her compliant while he secured his inheritance. Except the gifts had started before the wedding, before she had even known Julian would flee. The room had been prepared, the dress commissioned, the arrangements made not to trap her but to save her, as though Nathaniel had been planning for the possibility all along. And the things he had said in the library, the way he had looked at her, the trembling in his hands when he finally allowed himself to touch her. Could all of that have been a lie? Cordelia pressed her hands to her face and tried to think through the chaos of her emotions. A knock at the door, soft, hesitant. "Cordelia," Nathaniel's voice muffled by wood, "please, let me explain." "Go away. I know you are angry. You have every right to be, but please just listen." "I said go away." Silence, then footsteps retreating down the hall. Cordelia sank onto the edge of her bed and stared at nothing. 3 days passed. 3 days of meals sent back untouched. 3 days of Beatrice hovering anxiously. 3 days of footsteps outside her door, always hesitant, always retreating without knocking. On the morning of the 4th day, she found a letter slipped under her door. She recognized his handwriting immediately. Precise. Angular. Each letter formed with the same careful control he brought to everything. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. "Cordelia, Julian told you the truth about the will. I cannot deny it. My father, in his infinite wisdom, decided I needed motivation to marry. And so he created a deadline that would transfer half my inheritance to Julian if I failed to wed before my 35th birthday. But here is what Julian did not tell you. The deadline was 3 months away when you stood at that altar. I had time. I could have found someone else, someone suitable, someone appropriate, someone who would not complicate my carefully ordered life. I chose you, not because you were convenient, not because you were desperate, not because I needed a wife and you happened to be available. I chose you because I had watched you for 6 months and fallen helplessly, hopelessly, in love with a woman engaged to my brother. I chose you because when I saw you standing there abandoned and humiliated, I knew that if I did not act, I would spend the rest of my life regretting it. The will gave me an excuse, a justification that let me pretend I was being practical rather than admitting the truth, that I would have married you regardless, that I would have married you if it cost me everything. I should have told you. I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew there was a practical reason for my proposal, you would never believe the emotional one. I was wrong. You deserved the truth from the beginning, and I failed you. For that, I am sorrier than I can express. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. I will provide for you, ensure you are comfortable, make certain you never want for anything. But if there is any part of you that believes what we had was real, if you can find it in your heart to give me another chance, then come to the garden at sunset, the place where my mother's roses sleep. I will be waiting. I will wait as long as it takes. Yours in whatever way you will have me." Nathaniel. Cordelia read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and held it against her chest. Her mind raced. The will was real. That much was certain. But was the rest? She thought of the journal she had found. The entries about her that spanned months, observations so detailed, so intimate, that no one could have faked them. She thought of the portrait commissioned during her engagement to Julian, before any of this had begun. She thought of the gifts, not expensive baubles meant to dazzle, but thoughtful tokens that required knowing her, really knowing her. And she thought of the way he looked at her, the vulnerability in his eyes when he thought she was not watching, the tremor in his voice when he said her name. A man did not fake that, could not fake that, unless he was a far better actor than she believed possible. Another knock at the door, but this time it was Beatrice. Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess is here. She says it is urgent. Cordelia wiped her eyes and opened the door. Mind her in. Genevieve swept into the room like a force of nature, all steel and silk, and barely contained impatience. Enough, she said without preamble. You have wallowed for 3 days. That is sufficient. I am not wallowing, I am processing. You are hiding. The Dowager settled into a chair as though she owned the room. And while I understand the impulse, I will not allow it to continue. With respect, Your Grace, this is not your concern. Everything about this family is my concern. Genevieve's eyes softened slightly, especially when it involves my grandson finally allowing himself to feel something. Cordelia sank onto the edge of the bed. He lied to me. He omitted a truth. There is a difference. Not a meaningful one. Is there not? The Dowager leaned forward. Tell me, child, if Nathaniel had told you about the will during that first conversation at the altar, would you have believed he loved you? The question stopped Cordelia cold. Would she have believed, or would she have assumed exactly what Julian wanted her to assume, now that she was nothing more than a convenient solution to a legal problem? I do not know, she admitted. Exactly. So he did what he thought was necessary to protect both your futures. Was it the right choice? Perhaps not, but it was made from love, not calculation. Genevieve reached into her reticule and withdrew a small book bound in faded leather. This belonged to my daughter-in-law, Margaret, Nathaniel's mother. She held it out. Read it, particularly the entries from the last year of her life. Then decide whether my grandson is capable of the kind of manipulation you are accusing him of. Cordelia took the diary with trembling hands. Why are you showing me this? Because Nathaniel will not defend himself. He believes he deserves your anger, your rejection. He believes he deserves nothing but the cold he has wrapped himself in for 20 years. The Dowager stood. But I watched him these past weeks. I saw him come alive in ways I never thought possible. I saw him smile. I saw him hope, and I will be damned if I let Julian's poison destroy that. She moved toward the door, then paused. He is waiting in the garden, you know. Has been waiting since the moment he slipped that letter under your door. Waiting in the cold. Waiting in hope. Waiting for you. Then she was gone, and Cordelia was left holding a dead woman's secrets. She read the diary by candlelight. Margaret Thornhill's words were poetry and pain intertwined. She wrote of her marriage to a cold man, of loving someone incapable of loving her back, of watching her eldest son build the same walls his father had built, and knowing she was powerless to stop it. But it was the final entry, dated 3 days before her death, that broke Cordelia's heart. My dearest Nathaniel watches me with such fear in his eyes. He knows I am dying, though we have not spoken of it. He is 12 years old and already carrying the weight of this house on his shoulders. I wish I could tell him that love is not weakness, that feeling deeply is not something to be ashamed of, that the walls he is already building will protect him from pain, yes, but also from joy. I wish I could live long enough to see him find someone who makes those walls unnecessary, someone who sees through the ice to the tender heart beneath, someone who does not flinch from his coldness, but instead chooses to warm him slowly, patiently, until he remembers how to thaw. May he find that person someday. May he find a love that heals rather than wounds. And may he be brave enough to accept it when it comes. Cordelia closed the diary with shaking hands. She thought of the boy who had lost his mother and never learned to grieve, the man who had spent 20 years convinced that emotion was weakness, the duke who had seen her abandoned at an altar and decided, despite everything he believed about himself, to act. And she thought of the question she had been too afraid to ask. What did she want? Not what was logical, not what was safe, not what made sense given the lies and the truths and the complicated tangle of it all. What did her heart want? The answer came swift and certain. Him. She wanted him. Wanted the man who learned her preferences without being told, who commissioned portraits before he had any right to claim her, who stood in a garden waiting hour after hour for a forgiveness he did not believe he deserved. She wanted the duke who was learning slowly and painfully how to be human again. And she wanted to be the one who taught him. Cordelia stood, changed into a simple day dress, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to find her husband. The rose garden was silver with frost. Nathaniel stood among the bare branches, his coat pulled tight against the cold. He did not turn when she approached, though he must have heard her footsteps on the gravel path. How long have you been waiting? Cordelia asked softly. 4 hours, 16 minutes. His voice was hoarse. Though I would have waited 4 days, 4 months, 4 years if necessary. She moved to stand beside him. You must be freezing. I do not feel it. Liar. He turned to look at her then, and Cordelia's breath caught. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, filled with a desperate hope he was trying and failing to hide. "You came," he whispered. "I read your letter and your mother's diary." Something shifted in his expression. "My mother, she knew. Even then she knew what you would become, what you would need." Cordelia took a step closer. "She wanted you to find someone who would see through the walls, who would choose to stay anyway. And have you, his voice was raw, have you chosen to stay? That depends. On what? On whether you can promise me something." He straightened and she saw him brace himself as though expecting a blow. "Anything, whatever you need. Promise me no more secrets, no more omissions, no more protecting me from truths you think will hurt. If we do this, if I stay, we do it honestly, completely. I promise." The words came without hesitation. "I swear it on my mother's memory, no more secrets." Cordelia nodded. Then before she could lose her courage, she stepped forward and took his hands in hers. They were ice cold. "You are freezing," she said. "I told you I do not feel it. You feel everything, you always have. You have simply spent 20 years pretending otherwise." His breath hitched. "Cordelia, I believe you," she said. "I believe that you love me. I believe that you would have married me with or without the will. I believe that every gift, every gesture, every moment of these past weeks has been real." How, the word was anguished. "How can you believe that after what Julian said, after what I kept from you?" "Because I found your journal. I saw the entries, Nathaniel. Months of observations about me. Details no one else would notice or care about. You loved me before you had any excuse to, before you had any hope of claiming me. That is not calculation. That is devotion." A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. "I did not mean for you to find that. I know, which is why I believe it." She squeezed his frozen hands. "Take me inside. We need to talk, and I refuse to do it while you turn into ice. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought you would leave. I thought I had lost you. You almost did. But your mother's last wish was that you find someone who would choose to warm you slowly, patiently, until you remembered how to thaw." Cordelia smiled through tears. "I choose that. I choose you. I choose us." This time when he pulled her into his arms, she went willingly, wrapped herself around him and held on tight as his control finally beautifully shattered. He buried his face in her hair and shook with the force of emotions too long denied. She felt his tears hot against her neck, felt the way his hands gripped her as though she were the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. "I love you," he said against her skin. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I do not know how to do this, how to be what you need. Then we will learn together." They stood that way until the sun set completely, until the stars emerged cold and bright, until Cordelia's shawl was covered in frost and Nathaniel's tears had dried. And when they finally walked back to the house, it was hand in hand, fingers intertwined, hearts beginning to beat in rhythm. The ice was melting. The real courtship was just beginning. And Cordelia Thornhill, Duchess of Ravenwood, had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Spring came to Ravenwood Hall like a benediction. The gardens exploded into color. His mother's roses blooming in shades of pink and cream and deepest red. The air softened. The days lengthened. And Cordelia found herself falling in love with her life all over again. But more than that, she was falling deeper in love with the man who made that life possible. Nathaniel had changed since the night in the garden. Or perhaps he had simply stopped hiding. The barriers were still there. 20 years of habit could not be erased in weeks, but they were lower now, easier to climb. He smiled more, small private smiles that appeared when he thought she was not watching. When she caught him at it, he did not look away anymore. Instead, he held her gaze and let her see the warmth there. And the devotion. God, the devotion. If Cordelia had thought his attention before was remarkable, she had been woefully unprepared for what came after. Week one of their new beginning brought an expansion to her world. Cordelia discovered it on a Tuesday morning following the sound of hammers and saws to the west wing. The wall between two rooms had been removed, creating a vast space-line floor to ceiling with empty shelves. "What is this?" she asked Nathaniel at breakfast. He did not look up from his correspondence. "Your library. I thought you might appreciate having a space for your own collection." "My own, Nathaniel, this is enormous." "You read quickly. You will fill it." She stared at him speechless. He had just given her a room larger than her family's entire home, given it as casually as someone might offer a cup of tea. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will use it." He finally looked up and something soft moved through his eyes. Say you will fill it with whatever books bring you joy and spend hours there being happy. That is all I require. So she did. Within the month, shelves began to fill, not just with books Nathaniel ordered, though those arrived regularly, but with volumes she chose herself during trips to bookshops in London. First editions in modern novels, in poetry collections, in scientific journals. A room of her own, a space that was entirely hers. She had never had such a thing before. Month 4 brought an unexpected passion. They were walking through the stables one morning when Cordelia paused beside a gray mare with kind eyes. She is beautiful, she said softly. She is yours if you want her, Nathaniel replied. Mine. I have been meaning to ask, do you ride? I used to before. She trailed off, not needing to finish, before money became tight, before her family could no longer afford such luxuries. The next morning, a riding habit appeared in her dressing room, perfectly fitted, the color of claret wine. And Nathaniel, who admitted he had always preferred managing estates to riding through them, began joining her every morning. They rode through the grounds as spring unfurled around them, through woods where bluebells carpeted the forest floor, along streams that sparkled in the morning light. And slowly, carefully, Nathaniel learned to relax in the saddle, to enjoy rather than endure. You are getting better at this, Cordelia observed one morning as they cantered across an open field. I have excellent motivation, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. And she understood. He was not learning to ride. He was learning to share the things that brought her joy. Month 6 arrived with an unexpected visitor. Cordelia was in her library when Mrs. Fletcher announced that a gentleman was requesting an audience with the Duke, a gentleman who claimed to be family, Julian. She found Nathaniel in his study, his expression carved from granite. You do not have to see him, she said. No, but I should. He looked up at her and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. He is still my brother, and whatever else he has done, that bond remains. Then I am coming with you. Cordelia, we promised, no more secrets. No more facing things alone. She moved to his side. Whatever he wants, we hear it together. His hand found hers, squeezed. Together then. Julian looked terrible, thinner than before, his clothes expensive but ill-fitting as though he had lost weight recently. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his hands trembled slightly as he removed his hat. Brother, your grace. He bowed to each of them. Thank you for seeing me. What do you want, Julian? Nathaniel's voice was cold. To apologize. The words came quickly as though he had rehearsed them. To beg your forgiveness for what I did at the ball, for what I have done these past months, for all of it. Cordelia studied him carefully, looked for signs of deception, found only exhaustion and what might have been genuine remorse. You humiliated my wife in front of 300 people, Nathaniel said. You revealed private family matters out of spite and jealousy. Why should I believe this contrition is real? Because I have lost everything. Julian's voice cracked. Ophelia left me the moment she realized I had no money. The creditors I owed found me in Paris. I have spent the past 2 months running from debts I cannot pay, living in squalor, barely surviving. He looked at Cordelia then, and she saw tears in his eyes. I have had time to think, to understand what I threw away. Not the money or the title or the security. I threw away someone who would have been kind to me, who would have been patient with my flaws, who deserved so much better than what I gave. You are right, Cordelia said softly. I did deserve better. I found it. Julian flinched but nodded. I know, and I am glad, truly, you were wasted on me. He turned back to Nathaniel. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it, but I am asking for a chance, not to return to my old life, not to reclaim anything I lost, just a chance to prove I can be better than what I have been. Silence filled the study. Cordelia watched her husband's face, saw the war between anger and compassion playing out in his eyes. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. What would you do if I gave you this chance? Whatever you ask, I will work. Earn my keep. Start at the bottom if necessary. Julian's voice broke. I just want to matter, to be useful, to prove that I am more than the sum of my mistakes. Nathaniel looked at Cordelia. She saw the question in his eyes, saw him asking permission to show mercy to the man who had hurt them both. She thought of the boy in Margaret's diary, the younger son who had been overlooked and dismissed, the man who had built charm as armor because he had nothing else. Give him a chance, she said quietly. Not for his sake, for yours. Let him prove himself or fail, but let him try. Something like relief flooded Nathaniel's expression. He turned back to Julian. There is an estate in Scotland, smaller than Ravenwood. It has been mismanaged for years and needs someone to oversee its restoration. He paused. The work will be hard. The conditions Spartan. You will receive no allowance, only a modest salary based on performance. And if you fail, if you return to gambling or drink or any of your old habits, the offer is rescinded permanently. Julian's eyes widened. You would give me that after everything. I am giving you an opportunity. What you do with it is your choice. I will not fail you. Julian's voice was thick with emotion. I swear it. I will make you proud. Do not make me proud. Make yourself proud. Nathaniel stood. The steward will provide details. You leave in 1 week. Julian nodded, unable to speak. He bowed again deeper this time and left. When the door closed, Cordelia moved to her husband and wrapped her arms around him from behind. That was the right choice, she murmured against his back. Was it, or have I simply given him another chance to disappoint? Perhaps, but you also gave him a chance to heal, and in doing so you healed something in yourself. He turned in her arms and pulled her close. How are you so wise? I am not wise. I am simply a woman who knows what it is to be given a second chance. They stood that way until the last light faded from the windows, until dinner was announced, until Mrs. Fletcher came looking for them with barely concealed exasperation. And when they finally emerged, they emerged together, as they always would. Month 8 brought an unexpected discovery. Cordelia was searching for a book in Nathaniel's study. He had borrowed one of hers and forgotten to return it when she knocked over a stack of correspondence. Letters scattered across the desk. She knelt to gather them, and one particular envelope caught her eye. The seal was broken, the paper expensive, and the handwriting decidedly feminine. She should not have read it, should have returned it to the pile and left. But curiosity won. Your Grace, I write once more in hope that you will reconsider my father's proposal. A union between our families would be advantageous for us both. I remain as ever your devoted servant, Lady Caroline Ashworth. The date on the letter was from 2 years ago. Cordelia's hands shook as she rifled through the other letters. Found more. 14 more to be exact. All from different women. All proposing marriage or asking for reconsideration of proposals their fathers had made. All rejected. She was still sitting on the floor surrounded by evidence of her husband's determined bachelorhood when Nathaniel found her. What are you doing? Then he saw the letters. His face went carefully blank. Cordelia. 15 proposals, she said wonderingly. You rejected 15 proposals. 16 actually. One was verbal and rather insistent. Why did you keep these? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt beside her, gathering the letters with careful hands. To remind myself, he said finally, that I was waiting for something specific. Someone specific. Even when I could not admit what I was waiting for, these letters reminded me that settling would be a betrayal. A betrayal of what? Of hope. His voice was rough. Of the possibility that somewhere someone existed who would make all this worth it. The loneliness, the cold, the years of watching everyone else find what I thought I could never have. Cordelia touched his face. And did you find it? Was it worth it? Every moment of cold, every year of loneliness, every proposal rejected. He turned his head to kiss her palm. All of it was worth it to end up here. With you. She kissed him then, soft and slow and filled with a tenderness that made her chest ache. No more waiting, she whispered against his mouth. No more cold, no more loneliness. Just us. Just this. For as long as we both live. Promise. His voice was young, vulnerable. The voice of the boy who had lost his mother and forgotten how to hope. I promise I will choose you every day, every moment, every breath. He pulled her closer, and they stayed that way on the floor of his study, surrounded by evidence of roads not taken, grateful beyond measure for the one that had led them here. By month 10, Ravenwood Hall had been transformed. It was subtle. Visitors might not notice at first, but the house felt different now, warmer, lighter, as though sunshine had found its way into rooms that had been dark for 20 years. Flowers appeared in every room. Music drifted from the music room at odd hours. Laughter echoed in corridors that had known only silence. The servants noticed. Mrs. Fletcher smiled more. The footmen lost their air of careful anxiety. Even the gardeners reported that the roses were blooming more abundantly than they had in decades. It is you, Nathaniel said one evening as they walked through the gardens. You have brought life back to this place. It is not me, it is us. Cordelia squeezed his hand. We brought life back together. They had fallen into routines, comfortable rhythms that felt like home. Breakfast together every morning, walks in the garden before dinner, evenings in the library reading or talking or simply existing in companionable silence. And the acts of devotion never stopped. Nathaniel was incapable of passing a bookshop without acquiring something he thought she might like. Incapable of hearing her mention a preference without fulfilling it. Incapable of seeing her without finding some way to make her day brighter. "You are spoiling me," she said one morning, finding yet another rare volume on her breakfast tray. "Yes, that is the point. I do not need all of this. I know, that is why I enjoy giving it." He looked up from his newspaper, his gray eyes warm. "You ask for nothing, so I give you everything. Nathaniel, let me do this, Cordelia. Let me show you in the only way I know how that you are loved beyond measure, beyond reason, beyond anything I thought I was capable of feeling." How could she argue with that? Month 12 arrived with a significance neither of them could ignore. 1 year since the wedding that should never have happened. 1 year since she had stood abandoned at an altar and been saved by a man who loved her before he had any right to claim her. "We should mark it," Cordelia said one evening. "The anniversary." "How?" Nathaniel looked uncertain. "I am not skilled at celebrations. I want to renew our vows." He stared at her. "What?" "I want to go back to St. Benedict's. Stand at that altar again. But this time I want to walk down the aisle by choice, not desperation. I want to speak vows that are not tainted by scandal or compromise. I want to marry you again, Nathaniel. Properly, deliberately, with my whole heart." Something broke open in his expression. "You would do that. You would choose this again, knowing everything you know now. I would choose it 1,000 times over." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Then we will do it. Whatever you want, however you want it. I am yours to claim again and always." The preparations took 3 weeks. Cordelia insisted on simplicity, no elaborate reception, no society spectacle, just family and close friends gathered to witness something real. The invitations went out. The church was reserved. And Cordelia commissioned a new gown. Not ivory this time, not the color of false beginnings. This gown was gold, the color of sunshine and honey and all the warm things that had been missing from her life before Nathaniel. 2 days before the ceremony, Nathaniel gave her a gift. It was a book, leather-bound, the pages thick and creamy. And when she opened it, she found his handwriting filling every page. "What is this, our story?" His voice was quiet. "I have been writing it, recording everything from the beginning. The altar, the gifts, the garden reconciliation. All of it." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears as she read his words. His perspective on their courtship, his fears and hopes and desperate love spelled out in careful prose. "Why," she whispered, "so we never forget, so our children will know that love can begin with disaster and become beautiful. So there is proof written in my own hand that I chose you, that I will always choose you." She kissed him, then tasting salt and woe and overwhelming gratitude at John. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I am far from perfect, but I am yours. Yes, you are mine." The morning of the vow renewal dawned clear and bright. Cordelia woke early, her heart pounding with anticipation. Beatrice helped her dress, fussing over every detail with maternal care. The gold gown fit perfectly. The sapphires glittered at her throat, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. A year ago, she had been a girl desperate for rescue. Now she was a woman who had found her power, her voice, her choice. "You are ready, Your Grace," Beatrice said softly. "Yes, I am." The church was filled with flowers. Not white roses this time, but vibrant blooms in every color. Roses and peonies and lilies that made the space feel alive. The guests were few but precious. Her family in the front pews, her mother crying happy tears. Dowager Genevieve looking satisfied as a cat with cream. A handful of friends who had proven themselves worthy. And at the altar, Nathaniel. He wore gray today, not black, the color of storm clouds giving way to sun. His eyes found hers across the distance, and she saw everything she needed to know in that gaze. Love, devotion, home. The music began, but Cordelia did not move immediately. "Shall we, my dear?" her father asked, offering his arm. "No," her voice was gentle but firm. "Thank you, Father, but I walk alone." Surprise flickered across his face, then understanding, then pride. Cordelia stepped into the aisle and began to walk. Not being given away, not being escorted. Walking of her own free will toward the man she had chosen. The man who had chosen her. The man who would never stop spoiling her in all the ways that mattered. The walk seemed to take forever and no time at all. Every step a promise, every breath a choice. And when she reached the altar, Nathaniel extended his hand. She took it. "Hello." he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Hello. Father Whitmore smiled at them both, his nervousness from a year ago replaced with genuine joy. Dearly beloved, he began. But Cordelia barely heard the words. She was too focused on Nathaniel's face, on the way his thumb stroked across her knuckles, on the slight tremor in his hands that told her he was as moved as she was. When it came time for vows, they had written their own. Cordelia spoke first, her voice clear and strong. I, Cordelia, choose you, Nathaniel. Not because I must, not because circumstance forced my hand, but because in the past year you have taught me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. You have spoiled me with kindness and attention and unwavering devotion. You have built me a library and learned my preferences and filled every room with flowers. But more than that, you have let me see you, the real you, the vulnerable, tender, desperately hopeful man beneath the ice. And I love that man with my whole heart. I choose you today. I will choose you tomorrow. I will choose you every day for the rest of our lives. Tears streamed down Nathaniel's face. He made no attempt to hide them. When he spoke, his voice shook. I, Nathaniel, choose you, Cordelia. As I chose you a year ago, when I stood in that doorway and knew I could not let you walk away. As I have chosen you every moment since. You have transformed my life in ways I cannot adequately express. You have brought warmth to cold rooms and music to silent halls and joy to a heart I thought had forgotten how to feel. I promise to never stop spoiling you. Never stop showing you how precious you are. Never stop being grateful that you saw worth in me when I could not see it in myself. I am yours completely and irrevocably for as long as I draw breath. They exchanged rings, the same rings from a year ago now polished and blessed anew. Father Whitmore pronounced them husband and wife again and always. And when Nathaniel kissed her, it was not the formal brush of lips from their first ceremony. It was deep and slow and filled with a year's worth of love, finally given permission to overflow. The congregation erupted in applause, but Cordelia barely heard. She was too busy drowning in her husband's embrace in the certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. The reception was held at Ravenwood Hall, intimate and perfect. The ballroom had been transformed. Flowers everywhere, candles casting warm light, musicians playing soft melodies that filled the space with beauty. Cordelia and Nathaniel danced, and this time there was no tension, no uncertainty, just two people who had fought their way to happiness and were determined to celebrate it. After the first waltz, Nathaniel led her to a small table where a document lay. Official, legal, bearing multiple seals. What is this, the deed to Ravenwood Hall in your name? Cordelia's breath caught. What? This is not just my home. It is our home, and I want you to know that you are not a guest here, not a visitor. You are the lady of this house in every sense, equal partners in everything. Nathaniel, I cannot. You can, you will. His voice was firm but tender. I have spent too many years making decisions alone, carrying burdens alone. I do not want that anymore. I want partnership. I want to build a life with you, not just give you shelter in mine. She threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. You impossible, wonderful man. Is that a yes? That is a yes to everything, to partnership, to equality, to building a life together. Good, he kissed her temple. Because I am not done spoiling you yet. She laughed against his chest. I would not expect anything less. The months that followed passed in contentment. Letters arrived from Scotland. Julian was working hard, the steward reported, making real progress, staying sober, finding purpose. I am proud of him, Nathaniel said one evening, reading the latest update. He is becoming who he was always meant to be. And you made that possible. We made it possible. Your compassion, your willingness to forgive. Cordelia rested her head on his shoulder. Forgiveness is easier when you are happy. And she was happy, deliriously, impossibly happy. Month 15 brought a change Cordelia had been both anticipating and fearing. She had missed her courses twice, had been ill in the mornings, had felt strange flutterings in her belly that might have been nerves or might have been something else entirely. The physician confirmed what she had suspected. She was with child. Cordelia sat with the news for 3 days before telling Nathaniel. Not because she was uncertain of his reaction, but because she wanted to find the right moment, the right words. She found him in the library one evening reading by firelight. Nathaniel. He looked up and immediately his expression shifted to concern. What is wrong? You look pale. I am not ill, or rather I am, but in a way that is entirely expected. Confusion flickered across his face, then understanding, then something that looked almost like fear. You are pregnant? Yes. He stood so abruptly his book tumbled to the floor. Are you certain? The physician confirmed it this morning. Silence. His face had gone carefully blank in a way she had not seen in months. Nathaniel, say something. His voice cracked. I do not know what to say. Fear curled in Cordelia's stomach. Are you not pleased? Pleased. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Cordelia, I am terrified. Why? Because my father was a terrible parent. Because I do not know how to be warm or demonstrative or any of the things a child needs. Because what if I fail? What if I cannot be what this child deserves? She pulled back to look at him, saw tears streaming down his face, and felt her own tears rise in response. You will not fail, she said firmly. You are the most attentive, caring, devoted man I have ever known. You notice everything. You remember everything. You go out of your way to ensure I am happy and comfortable and loved. Those same qualities will make you an extraordinary father. You cannot know that. I can, because I have watched you transform yourself over the past year. I have seen you learn to feel, to hope, to love, and this child will have the benefit of that transformation from the very beginning. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands settling over her still flat stomach. A child, he whispered. Our child. Yes. Made from love, not obligation, not duty. Love. Exactly. Then he was kissing her, his tears mixing with hers, his hands trembling against her face. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for this, for everything. For being the person who taught me that I was capable of this kind of joy. You always were capable. You simply needed permission to believe it. They held each other as the fire burned low, as stars filled the windows, as the future they were building together became more real with every passing moment. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Nathaniel became gloriously impossible. He insisted Cordelia rest constantly, brought her meals when she was too ill to go downstairs, read to her in the evenings, his hand always resting on her growing belly. I can feel the baby moving, he said one night, wonder in his voice. I know, she is quite active. I think so. Call it intuition. He kissed her stomach gently. Then she will be beautiful and brilliant and terrible like her mother. Cordelia laughed. I am not terrible. You terrified me from the moment I saw you, still do, in the best possible way. The nursery was prepared with the same meticulous attention Nathaniel brought to everything. The finest furniture, the softest linens, books and toys and everything a child could need. But it was the personal touches that moved Cordelia to tears. The rocking chair from his mother's room carefully restored, the music box that had belonged to his grandmother. The portrait of Margaret hung where their daughter would see it every day. I want her to know her grandmother, Nathaniel said, even if only through stories and images. I want her to know the woman who wanted me to find love, who wanted me to find you. We will tell her everything, all the stories, all the love. Early spring of year 2 arrived with a daughter. The labor was long and difficult. Nathaniel paced outside the bedroom for hours, deaf to Mrs. Fletcher's assurances, deaf to the physician's calm updates. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, he nearly broke down the door. Cordelia lay exhausted in the bed, her hair plastered to her forehead, her face pale. But she was smiling, and in her arms, wrapped in blankets, was the smallest, most perfect creature Nathaniel had ever seen. Hello, Papa, Cordelia said softly. Come meet your daughter. He crossed the room on shaking legs, looked down at the tiny face, the wisps of dark hair, the eyes that would someday be gray like his. She is, his voice failed. Perfect. Yes, she is. What shall we name her? They had discussed options, classical names, family names, traditional names. But looking at his daughter, at the miracle in Cordelia's arms, Nathaniel knew there was only one name that fit. Margaret, he whispered, for my mother, for the woman who wanted me to find this, to find you, to find happiness. Margaret Cordelia Thornhill, Cordelia said, testing the name. It is perfect. He sat on the edge of the bed and gathered his wife and daughter into his arms, his family, his heart, his entire world contained in this moment. I love you, he said, both of you, more than I knew it was possible to love. We love you too, Cordelia whispered. The final months passed in a haze of sleepless nights and perfect mornings. Margaret grew strong and healthy. Nathaniel was predictably completely besotted. He spent hours holding her, reading to her, carrying her through the gardens and telling her the names of every flower. Letters continued from Scotland. Julian had met someone, a local woman, widowed and kind, who made him want to be better. I am happy for him, Nathaniel said. He deserves a chance at what we have. We all deserve second chances, Cordelia said. One perfect afternoon in late spring, Cordelia sat in the rose garden with Margaret on her lap while Nathaniel read to them both. The roses bloomed magnificently pink and cream and red, exactly as his mother had planted them decades ago. Happy? Nathaniel asked, looking up from the book. Deliriously. He set the book aside and pulled them both close. I never thought I would have this. A family, a home filled with laughter instead of silence, a reason to wake up grateful instead of merely dutiful. You always deserved it. You simply needed to believe you were worthy of it. Margaret reached for a rose petal and Cordelia caught her tiny hand gently. Careful, darling. They have thorns. Like her mother, Nathaniel said, his eyes warm. Beautiful and strong and perfectly capable of protecting what matters. Cordelia kissed him softly. We protect each other now. That is what family does. They sat together as the sun began to set, as birds sang in the trees, as the future they had built together stretched out before them in all its impossible beauty. Some love stories began with disaster. Theirs had begun with abandonment and humiliation and public shame. But it had transformed into this: a man learning to thaw, a woman finding her strength, a family built from choice and devotion and unwavering love, and a duke who never ever stopped spoiling the woman who had taught him how to live. Margaret fell asleep in Cordelia's arms. Nathaniel rested his head on her shoulder. And Cordelia looked out over the gardens of Ravenwood Hall, their home, their sanctuary, their kingdom, and knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find. Not perfection, but something better. Each other. Forever.